Hi everyone, my name is Susan David. I'm the author of Emotional Agility, and I am doing a Facebook Live Ask Me Anything. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to enter those in the comments, and I'll do my best in the next 15-20 minutes to answer any questions that you have. So questions about emotions, about emotional agility, about resilience, about stress, any aspect of our inner world, and how our inner world and our behaviors impact ultimately on the life that we live. So amazing. I've had a hugely busy week. Emotional Agility has actually been number 4 of all ebooks on Amazon, which has been incredible. So if you've been spreading the word about the book, writing reviews or helping to share, that'd just be absolutely amazing, and I'm so grateful. This was a labor of love. I quite literally spent years thinking about writing the book, and my work as a psychologist, my research in emotions, and thinking about how I could bring together these ideas in a way that was practical and helpful to people. And then, of course, spent an entire year in the library writing. So I'm so grateful that it's having an impact, and for all the letters and comments that I'm getting from people. So again, if you're joining, please feel free to let us know where you're joining from. Say hello in the comments, and anything that is connecting with you, anything that you are enjoying about emotional agility. If you've got any questions at all about emotions, emotional agility, stress, resilience, any aspect of our inner world that impacts, please let me know. And so I've got a couple of questions that people have sent over the past few weeks. And I didn't get to this one recently, but I got an email last night that reminded me of it. So I'll start with this question. So it's a question from Emil, and it's a question that says, "Dear Susan, I'm a big fan of yours." Thank you, Emil. "And I read most of your pieces and watch most of your interviews. There's something that I've been wanting to ask you." And I'm reading on a computer here, which is why I'm not looking at the screen. "There's something that I've been wanting to ask you. Could you tell us in one of your next live interviews your life story in a bit more detail? For example, how did you end up becoming a psychologist and an author? What was your life journey like on the road getting to where you are now? And how did you overcome any doubts and challenges? A lot of people, including me, struggle with big life decisions, and it's a true inspiration to hear the life stories of people we admire. You started talking a bit about this in your interview with Beth Comstock. For those of you who missed it, I did a Facebook Live with Beth Comstock yesterday. But I think it was only the beginning of the story. Thank you so much in advance." So thank you, Emil, for asking that question. So what Emil's asking is if I could share a little bit of my background and how I made the various life decisions that I did in order ultimately to become a psychologist and to author Emotional Agility. So I'll do my best. Obviously, so I'm 47, so there's a lot of life in there to date. But I think a couple of things. One of the things that I talk about in Emotional Agility is the experience that I had when my father died, when I was a very young child. I was a teenager. And I think that was the first pivot point in my life in starting to help me to question some of the narratives that we have in society about just be positive and think positive versus the reality of the transition that I was going through in my life, which was dealing with the reality of this person that I love dying. So that was a really tough experience, and for me, one of those transition points was recognizing that so often what we hear in the media about just be happy and just be positive actually is not helpful. So I think to Emil's question, and if you're joining us, please feel free to say hello in the comments, ask me anything about emotions and emotional agility. So to Emil's question, tell me a bit about your own life and your own transitions. This was really important to me because I recognize that so much of what we're told about our own emotional health and our own emotional well-being, which is to just move forward, is actually just not the reality. that often when we just pretend, when we put in a fake smile, and when we try to grit our way through difficult experiences, firstly, we stop living authentically, and secondly, we ultimately don't learn from those experiences. And I remember my mom, when my dad was really, it must have been a few days after my dad died, I remember my mom saying to me, Susan, you're not going to realize this now, but you are lucky. And I was really angry with her. Like, what do you mean I'm lucky? This is an awful thing to say. And she didn't mean it in that way. You know, she said to me, the experience that you're going through now is something that will ultimately help you to empathize with other people and to be resilient and to connect with experiences that others are having. So, Emil, to answer your question, firstly, I think that so often we go through difficult experiences with the aim of just trying to push through it. And sometimes those experiences are difficult. We didn't ask for them, they came to us. And sometimes those experiences are by choice. But I think a core thing that I've tried to do in my own life and in my own career is really try to kind of mine those experiences. What do they tell me about myself? What do they tell me about the kind of work that I want to do, and so on? So another example is being in a job many years ago at the beginning of my career that I absolutely hated. I could not hate a job more than this particular job. And yes, I recognize that I hated the job, but I think the process of saying to myself, what is it about it? What does it tell me about my own values? And for me, that was autonomy. The job was a job in which I was being micromanaged. Autonomy is really important. And so that started to kind of shape what were the things that drove me to the next opportunity or the next choice that I made. Two other points that come to mind, and then I'll go on to another question. But I think this is just really such a lovely question that so many people ask and touches on so many things. Is a lot of times people, when you're going through a transition, a job loss, a career change, when you're grieving, there's often this expectation from people that there's stages. You know, you do the anger stage, and then you do the grief stage, and then you do the denial stage, and then you do the... And the same exists in jobs. You know, people think that we should get over it in a predictable way. And I think that, you know, again, this isn't supported by the research. Grief can be very raw and very real in very unpredictable ways, and difficulties with situations that we find ourselves in our relationships and beyond can be really difficult. And so I think what's really important, and one of the things that I learned early on, is I would often approach myself with, I've got these expectations and I should be getting over this already, or there's something wrong with me because I'm struggling with a particular situation. And I remember, I must have been in my early 20s, I remember catching myself one day and catching my self-talk. And my self-talk was really about calling myself an idiot and calling myself stupid. And I recognized almost in that moment that one of the most important things that I could do to myself was to be my own friend. And so I stopped struggling very quickly with this idea of, should I feel something, shouldn't I feel something, and was more able to move into a stage of, what am I feeling? How can I be with that emotion in a kind way? And what can I learn from that? So thank you so much for joining. We've got great questions and comments coming up, but you know, that's a really critical aspect. And then just one last thing that I wanted to say, because I think this is what Emil is connecting with when he asked the question about my own journey, is so often we look around us and things seem predictable. You know, we see other people's trajectories and it seems predictable. But I can say from my own experience, I lost my dad when I was 16 years old. I then dropped out of college. So I went off to college and within about 6 weeks dropped out and came back, and my first job was teaching secretarial skills at a secretarial college, because I came home from this dropout experience and was like, well, I've got a year before I can register for anything else. And so I started a secretarial course and then started teaching in that course. And that's how I started teaching. I backpacked around the world for 2 years. So I went to India, Nepal, Greece with a backpack for 2 years. And I suppose my point being here is that so often we think that things are in a straight line because that's what it appears when we look at other people's lives and careers. But for me, what the reality was is there was no straight line. I just needed to keep on holding on to who do I want to be? What is important to me? How can I be with that kindly? And how can I keep making moves that are in the direction of those values? So for me, that was about autonomy. It was about understanding and connecting others. It was about emotions. And so trying to craft something that ultimately enabled me to do that. And it's never perfect, but that's some answer to your question. So again, if you're joining me, thank you so much. I'm Susan David, author of Emotional Agility. And this week's been an amazing week. Emotional Agility has been number 4 on Amazon of all the ebooks on Amazon. And there's a special on at the moment, which is a one-off special that the publishers very kindly offered to do for us, which is that the ebook is available for $1.99 from now through until Sunday. So if you want to download it or if you want to share that with anyone, please feel free to. So just to a couple more questions. Hi Marius, hi Audra, and hi Dora. Thank you so much for joining me. Hi Lucille, thank you for joining. If you're joining now, please say hello in the comments and please let me know if you've got any questions. So I've got a question from Audra. Audra says, could you please talk more about determining values? Is there a definitive source, list, or exercise that could help me to start defining mine? I talk about this in Emotional Agility in one chapter, this whole idea of what is your why, what are your values. For those of you who haven't taken my quiz yet, if you go to susandavid.com/learn, there's a quiz there that lists a whole lot of values. There's also, if you are interested in this core idea and this idea of a list of values, you could go to, I've got an article that I wrote for Harvard Business Review recently called 3 Ways to Better Understand Your Emotions. And in that article, there's a list of values. So in Emotional Agility, I go through a fairly extensive set of questions about helping people to think through, beneath this difficult emotion, beneath this difficult experience, what is the emotion telling me about, am I feeling guilty about something? So what does that tell me that I care about? I'm avoiding something. What does that tell me I'm trying to protect myself from? And often beneath those difficult emotions, there's signposts to things that we value. And that is a really important aspect of emotional agility. It's not just about defining values or even listening to what our parents tell us our values should be, but starting to listen to your inner heartbeat. And it can take a while. It can take practice. If you have been so caught up in a career or in parenting or in busyness, we often forget how to hear the heartbeat of our own why. And so there's some core ways that we can start connecting with that. What did I do today that was worthwhile? That starts to tell me what's important. And what's really important here is it's not just what did I enjoy, because we can enjoy stuff. We can even be really good at stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we value that thing, that we find that thing worthwhile, that we want it to be some core idea of how we live our lives. So our values change, and it's important revisiting this fairly frequently, because values aren't these things that stay in inflexible ways in our hearts. So welcome everyone. Linda, thank you so much. Linda says, I loved your book. It was life-changing. Thank you. Again, it was a labor of love, and I just am so grateful that it's impacting people. So I've got a question from Ritika. Sorry, I need glasses actually. I have a prescription. Hi Susan, how do you deal with anxiety? I feel that I can't trust anyone anymore. So without knowing the specific aspect of your situation, what is really critical, I think, when it comes to anxiety is anxiety can feel really difficult. And because it is difficult, feeling anxious is difficult, and feeling that you can't trust people is difficult. So I think the first thing around anxiety is to recognize that anxiety. A lot of times what people do with anxiety is they try to push it aside, and it makes it even worse. Or what they do is, I talk about in emotional agility, how often people brood on their anxiety. You know, I feel terrible, I feel anxious. And again, that can not be helpful. So in emotional agility, I talk about the role of anxiety and how anxiety has a function in our lives and in our world. And it doesn't feel like something that could ever be a gift, but often can be, because it often starts to connect you in with, gee, you know, things aren't going well in my work or in my life. I've got to make changes. And so often anxiety, it's so difficult. But if we can not fight it and start to kind of center ourselves kindly into, what is this emotion telling me? Data, not directions. In other words, the emotion isn't a fact. It can be really helpful. So that's a really important part of anxiety. And then the other part is that the first thing that we want to do when we feel anxious is to avoid, because our brains are telling us that there is something to be feared. It might be people, it might be trusting others, but the first thing that we want to do is avoid. And, you know, one of the great paradoxes of psychology, one of the great paradoxes of human nature, is that avoidance, what that does is it actually makes anxiety worse. Because what you're doing is you are kind of telling your brain that the thing that you're avoiding, that the avoidance is keeping you safe. And so you're not actually moving into a space where you're navigating the depth and the reality of what's going on. So avoidance can often feel really comfortable, but avoidance often perpetuates the situation. So, you know, courage over comfort, and recognizing that, again, courage is not the doing away with fear. It's not doing away with anger. It's not doing away with anxiety. But courage is fear walking. Courage is about noticing your anxiety, trying to get a sense of what your anxiety is telling you, but then still choosing to walk in the direction of your values. So thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one, and a lot of you know, anxiety is a anxiety, depression, and so on are just very real, very difficult things that so many of us work through and work with in so many ways. So thank you. Another question. Oh, we're getting so many. I'm not going to be able to get through all of these, but I'll do my best. And what I tend to do is in the next Facebook Live, I'll answer some more. So thank you. If you're joining me, please feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're coming from. And, you know, just tell us where you're coming from and if you've got any questions. So a question here is, how do you not get stuck in self-doubt when people criticize your approach in meetings? As an INTJ, I have a more direct approach. If I were a man, I'm pretty sure that no one would mind. But as a woman, they do, and it's frustrating. So this is really a very important question, which is basically saying, when you've got an approach that is maybe, you know, other people, you've got an approach giving feedback, for example, that's very direct, but it's not maybe going down so well with others, and then you feeling criticized by them. How do you navigate that? So I think this is, you know, something that all of us deal with, whether it's in relationships or at home, at work, and so on. So I think a critical aspect of this is that when we feel self-doubt, we can often start treating that thought as a fact. So I'm feeling self-doubt, I'm feeling like a fraud, you know, maybe I should just shut up, maybe I've got nothing to contribute, maybe my way is the wrong way. And so what we start doing in that situation is we treat the thought as a fact. And this then engages us in maneuvering in the meeting about, should I say something, shouldn't I say something, this is so frustrating, why can't they see me, and so on. So I think a really kind of one of the greatest pieces of human suffering comes from the idea that we treat our thoughts and emotions as fact. So I think a critical aspect of self-doubt, and it can be any self-doubt, it can be self-doubt about your approach or about a thought that you've had, is to notice that for what it is. You know, I've noticed this thought that I'm feeling like a fraud, or I've noticed this thought that I'm not being heard. And noticing it, but not trying to just do away with it, is critical, because this enables us to try and understand ourselves and to be more effective with ourselves. But I think another aspect to this question that is really critical is, whenever we're in a meeting, when we're in a relationship, because there are two people involved, there's always going to be two approaches or more than two approaches. And it can become very difficult when our approach is at odds with the approach of the other person, because you always land up being in a situation where there's a me with my personality and a them with their personality. And so one of the things that I think is just critical to this, and it's fundamental to team building, it's fundamental to leadership, and it's critical to our effectiveness in all walks of life, is this. There's your own why. Okay, so there's this like, I want to say something because I want to be direct, or I want to say something because this is important and this is my personality. And I think those are like really valid, very real ways of connecting because they're authentic. And then there's the other person's why. And then there's this joint why. There's this, what are we trying to do together at this table? What are we trying to achieve? So what is this feedback in the service of? Is it in the service of this client goal? Is it in the service of us all doing a great project? What is the shared goal? And so I think, you know, there are many aspects of how we can navigate these kinds of situations. But to answer this question, I think in a very practical way, I think sometimes it's helpful when we're in a meeting where we're giving feedback and we feel like we're not being seen or heard because our approach might be different, is to also think about what is the joint why? You know, what is the joint value? What is the shared goal that is here at this table and that is so important? So thank you. I think it's a really important question. So someone asked a question also, and I think this is really critical. It relates to what we were speaking about earlier. And if you're joining now, I'm Susan David, author of Emotional Agility. Please feel free to say hi in the comments and let us know where you are joining us from. And if you've got any questions, I won't get to answer them all today. I'll probably only have time for one more, but we will answer them in other Facebook Lives. So there was a question about, do you think education in, I think it's to do with my context, do you think education or life experience matter more? It's a difficult question because obviously I come to this with my background and with my life experience, but to me, we come to the world with our life experience, and the life experience and the learning from life experience, I think ultimately just helps us to shape everything. So for me, this is a really critical aspect. I watched this lovely interview the other day with Louis C.K. where he was talking about how he had sent out an email that was basically an email about Donald Trump to his email list. And he spoke about how he said stuff in that email that he then sent out to hundreds of thousands of people. And he spoke about how he regretted the email, but he wouldn't take it back. And I loved that approach that he had, because he said, I regretted the email, but I wouldn't take it back. And why? Because I regretted the email because I was emotionally inagile. I felt something and therefore I just responded, which is basically emotionally inagile when we describe this in emotional agility, where your thoughts and your emotions just drive you rather than your values. But then this other nugget, this gold mine that he had, which is, but I wouldn't take it back. And Stephen Colbert said, why wouldn't you take it back? And he said, because we as, and of course I'm paraphrasing, because we as human beings are the culmination of all of who we are. We are our experiences. We are our mistakes. We are our setbacks. We are our failures. And if you try to erase your setbacks, your failures, your regrets, your experiences, then you erase yourself. And so the beauty of all of us is that we are who we are in our imperfections. And it's that ultimately helps us to thrive and grow and experience the richness of life as it is, not as we wish it to be, but as it is, which is beautiful and imperfect. So thank you for that question. I've got time for one more. I would love to learn, this comes from Robin, I would love to learn how to shut off the negative thoughts. One sentence, one idea. My boyfriend says, turn off a switch. Is it easier for males? So you want one sentence or one idea about how to shut off your negative thoughts. I'll try one sentence. End the struggle by dropping the rope. What do I mean by that? Another one sentence. Your negative thoughts are your brain doing its job, which is trying to protect you, trying to help you. When we treat our negative thoughts as something that we need to do away with, and we try to bottle them and push them aside, what we know is that they come back, and they come back with greater levels of frequency. In psychology, this is called amplification. It's this boomerang effect. So when we try to shut off negative thoughts, it doesn't work. So here's my one sentence. Accept your thoughts for what they are. Notice them as thoughts. I'm noticing the thought that I'm a fraud. I'm noticing the thought that this person's undermining me. I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad at the moment. This is different from just saying, I'm feeling sad. I am angry. You're saying, I'm noticing the thought. I'm noticing. And then recognize in this that if you can notice something for what it is, a thought or emotion, it's data, not directions. You can then move on because you've created a space. So again, this isn't much more than one sentence, I know, but stop struggling with trying to end negative thoughts. Notice those thoughts with curiosity, with courage and compassion. And then choose to do what you need to do in the service of your values. So that's my very long one sentence. Thank you for that. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for your lovely comment. So I am nearing the end here. Thank you so much for watching this. I will do a number of these in upcoming weeks. If you are interested in emotional agility, some of you will already have read the book. If you haven't, now is the time to buy it, because until Sunday, it is available for $1.99 as an ebook, which is a one-off deal that the publishers agreed to offer us for this week only. If you are interested in my quiz, I've got a free emotional agility quiz, susandavid.com/learn. And please feel free, if you've got any comments or feedback, I read every single email I get, and I try to reply to as many as I can. I don't always get to it quickly, but I really am grateful for you joining, and I look so forward to connecting. So just some very important things as well is, with the emotional agility offer, it is unfortunately USA and Canada only. So that $1.99 ebook offer is USA and Canada only. If you do land up buying either the ebook or any other book of emotional agility, please enter your details onto susandavid.com/bonus. And what that will do is it will give you a whole lot of bonus goodies. We're organizing various webinars. There's some quote cards. There's a whole lot of things there that, even though if you're outside of the US, you can't get the $1.99, that will be able to be accessed from that. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to share it. If you enjoyed the book, please feel free to share it. And please leave reviews on Amazon. If the book has meant something to you in a way that has helped, please feel free to let others know, because that's how Amazon does what it presents to you. That's how they figure it out. So anyway, enough of that. I just wanted to say thank you and connect again soon. Goodbye.